Coming up, an interview with Martin McAloon of Prefab Sprout. Martin talks about his solo shows, performing Prefab Sprout songs written by brother Paddy. Now, it's a brave move, and the only way with Paddy's illness that we're ever likely to hear those wonderful Prefab Sprout songs live again. In this interview, Martin talks about his and Paddy's childhood, his role in the band, and how he's finally overcome his fears on being a frontman.
I want people to go away and think, oh, remember when he did that version of it rather than the record. I have I don't listen to the records, so I don't have any intention of recreating the records. If you're a non-singer, you have to think yourself through it. It was the first time I think that I ever felt that I could communicate or that I had something to say. Everybody's 5 years older than me. I was a young kid. It wasn't really a career. It was a kind of a lifestyle that you inhabited. There's a couple of songs that I would love to play live that nobody's ever heard. But at the same time,
don't go away, just time for me to ask you to like, subscribe, or even become a member of this channel. Now, the lowest membership is just €1.99. That's about $2. I think it's under £2, definitely. And it allows me to continue to bring you these interviews. Now, sit back and enjoy an interview with the enigmatic Martin McAloon. Martin McAloon, welcome. Now, I obviously want to talk about your solo tour because you're performing Prefab Sprout singles, and I'll get to that later. But I want to start early because there's this sentence on your website that I found completely intriguing. I was once a bass player. But I want to start no, because I think it says so much, but I want to start before you were a bass player and when you were growing up. What music were you brought up around?
the music I was brought up around would be big fans of the Beatles from day one, from the moment I was born. I think I was born the week that Moon River was number one. So that kind of I'm pleased about that. I think it's a good one to be born to. And so I think just melody. My mother was into melody. My dad was into melody. They both could play the piano sort of by ear. My dad would play in a kind of Winfred Atwell, Mrs. Mills style, almost boogie woogie, but not quite. It was like straddle stride piano. The left hand would be bouncing octaves, so it would play an octave on the bass at the bottom end of the keyboard, then a chord that suggests the octave in the middle, and then you'd be playing octave melodies at the top, and they'd be bouncing around. So that was my dad's style of playing, and my mother was more like watching swans' wings. She would play the piano across the keyboards, and pick out the tunes and the melodies of songs. And I've played the guitar since I was 7. So it was my dad bought my mother a guitar. I saw her first lessons written down 3 chord boxes for A, D, and D. And I just set about working on them on my own, really. Just I saw them, recognized what they were doing, recognized the fretboard. It's the fretboard of the guitar isn't that much different to a dartboard. You've just got wires and spaces between, and you just got to hit the right ones at the right time.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we are the same generation, and my mother also used to play piano by ear, and it seems to be a generational thing. But in your family, when you have like parents who are musical and you're brought up around that, it does feel like it's a sort of a natural process because there's some sort of wanting on the parent side for you to also be creative. Yeah. Did they ever really see at the beginning you become moving into a creative life? Because I was brought around, my mother would say to me, you have to earn money.
Yeah. It was the usual thing was it wasn't from my parents, but it would be from family older family people. Sort of my dad was, I think, was one of the youngest of, I'm guessing, 7 or 8, 6, 7 or 8. I can't remember offhand. And so, and we were all the youngest of those those. Our cousins are all quite a bit older than us. Me and our Paddy were at a family do shortly after the pandemic, and there was 13 of us cousins in a row, and me and Paddy were the youngest. So it's shocking when you see us two as the youngest of a group of people. But yeah, the older generation would say to us, if you stick to the business, my dad took ill when I was really young. So if you stuck to the business and grew your dad's business, you would it would be worth it. But we always wanted to be somewhere else, which was music. So yeah, I don't know whether they wanted us to be music. I mean, I was taught piano when I was about 7, but I hated it. I wanted to be playing football, and it was a nightmare. But yeah, but I remember things like watching Noddy Holder and Slade on Top of the Pops playing because I Love You, and I was trying to figure out the guitar chords, but my dad walked out the room and he came back with a violin. I didn't even know he played violin or had one, and he just started to play along with the band, figuring out the violin and just playing it alongside it. And that was an eye opener, because that meant you can pick a tune from anywhere and just go for it, and it doesn't matter if you know the instrument or not.
I mean, the other thing that's really fascinating about your childhood, because I was brought up in a small village and I was looking at Wikipedia to see how many people lived
Oh,
in
man, how
Witten
many?
Gilbert.
How
And well,
many?
it says I've only got 2011 and it was 2,500. So I'm guessing in the 70s, this picturesque, sort of quiet, lovely village had very few people in it.
It's a crossroads between two pit villages. And it's the legacy of a French guy, I think, who was probably involved with the building of Durham Cathedral. Um, and I think there was there became a leper colony there. So that's what it was known as at one point. But yeah, it was like there was pit villages surrounding us, Langley Park, Sacriston, Bear Park, and we were in the kind of the valley between them.
I mean, I remember in my village, there were just like, I didn't play with kids my own age because there weren't enough kids my own age to play with. So you end up sort of having completely mixed ages of
Yeah.
friends. And in a sense, I think you also get different influences than you would have got if you were in a sort of bigger town or city. It's slightly different. How do you see it looking back, what you got out of living and being brought up in this small community?
Um, um, well, there was always a wanting to get away from it. But there was you know, I had some good friends, but um, the, my father owned a garage, uh, and it would serve petrol and fix cars and all that. And so he relied on a younger generation coming in to do the petrol. I serve petrol and do those kind of things. In those days, it wasn't self-service. And you were out in whatever weather and you check the wheels and the tires and the engines and fix tires. And, I did that from a very early age. From before I was 10, I could fix a tire. I could change an inner tube and, all sort the valves out. But we had people who were probably 5 or 6 years older than me or 10 years older than me coming in there and working there and helping out. And they all, a lot of them had records that I remember some of them in the early 60s, the Motown records that were the older generation were listening to, in the Rolling Stones, those kind of things were there. And then a bit later on, there was one guy's whole family, all his sisters had worked at the garage of the Cunninghams, and Mick Cunningham, the eldest lad, his record collection was fantastic. It was Frank Zappa, Groundhog, so all these things. Yeah, and so you kind of, once you realize that they had these record collections, it was in older generations. But then again, our Paddy's friends from college, they were, everything from Deep Purple. And because I played the guitar from 7, I was accepted as being able to fit in with these guys who were 5 or 6 years older than me. I could hear a record and figure it out. I mean, I remember figuring out a record when I was at school, and I'd only be about 10, and I hadn't heard the record. They were singing it. And it was I don't want to say what it is because he's not so popular now. But
Oh,
yeah, it was a
I
hit
think I know.
around about 1972.
Did
It
you
was a
want to
hit.
be in his gang?
I didn't, but I could play the guitar.
Oh dear.
They
You
sang
mentioned
they
that.
sang the tune to us, and I played it, and that's why I'd never even heard the song. So yeah,
Oh wow. You said like, one of the things that you wanted to do was get out of the village, but you also talked about watching Slade on TV. And one of the
yeah,
big things for me as a teenager was that, I mean, I'm gay and I was a gay teenager, obviously, and I saw Bowie on TV and it was like an escape for me. It was like, this is where I could belong as a
yeah,
person. Did music provide a form of escape for you?
yeah. Oh, totally, totally. Um, Everything about from the word go, it was always yeah, complete escape. It was either that or football, and uh, and from a very early age, we had the name of the band from when I would be 10 or 12 or something like that. And it was me, Paddy, and Mick Salmon, a friend who we'd grown up with. We all played guitar from that age, from when I was 7, and it was everything about it was we want to be them. We used to worship Mark Bolan. We had his posters on Paddy's wall, and we'd literally worship the poster and play the records. It was everything.
Was the
So
bond you was the bond you had at that period with Paddy because
oh,
of music or
well,
because you were brothers?
I was 5 years younger than him, so he was my big brother who knew everything. Um, and I was listening to something last night on Radio 3 about there was a program about whatever happened to light music and the idea of all those things, Eric Coates and people like that from the war years and how light music came to be. And I was listening to somebody, and he was, this elderly fellow who's probably no longer with us, but he started out, they all started out as copyists at a publishing firm, and they'd all copy out the music of the composer. And then through doing this, they learned their craft. And I thought, this is what I was when I was 7. I was a copyist of my brother's guitar work, and I'd figure out everything that he did, and I'd gradually start to become an arranger in my own right, because you're arranging songs for records, but those records are just events of those days that you were in the studios with that budget. If you turned up today and said Steve McQueen's never been invented and you've got to go into a studio now, there would be a whole different set of parameters that you would use. Different studios, you'd do it at home, you'd do it, with a different idea of what's available. And so you arrange for those for the event of that time. So so nothing is static. So if I'm going out with a 60-piece orchestra, then you would arrange it for that and for the halls that you're going to be in. You wouldn't arrange it for a PA system in a back room of a bar. So I felt like after hearing the thing last night, I feel like I am a copyist who learned his craft by doing this and seeing the intricacies of what was happening, but then transferring them to how am I going to do it now without a band, without a singer, without a drummer.
Yeah, I mean, I'd want to get onto the tour in just a second. A couple more questions
Oh
before
my
I get
God.
there. I know, I know,
I'm
I
not
know
trying
you.
to wedge it in.
I know, but it's going
I've
to be
got
the whole second half of the interview. Don't worry, I've got loads of questions.
all right.
But
That's what I prefer.
well, I want to, you said about the arrangement, and I know that, Paddy would write the songs and sort of come in with
Yeah.
a full song, and then, and you essentially would, arrange it, transpose it, and look at it. But what do you feel when you look back? Because that sentence, "I was only the bass player," suggests this sort of feeling of not having massive value at that
Well,
point. But you you
well,
you
I,
did an
I,
awful lot. So what was your creative support and contribution, do you feel?
well, it was far more than playing 4 strings. 5 times a year. That's what it feels like. If you were to say what, you're the bass player in a band, you've been a bass player all of your life, and then you actually count the amount of songs that I played on, and if you allow 24 hours for each of those songs, then it still only comes to about 3 months work in your entire life. So it's not that big a deal. The bass playing, I think the support definitely. I think from everything from strategy to logistics to psychology and getting the work done and getting it out there, it takes a hell of a lot of strength. When you're if there's the kind of within the music industry, the usual thing is you follow the money, and the money is usually the singer, the songwriter. If the singer falls ill, it's hard to replace the singer. But if the bass player or the drummer fall under a bus, you're likely to find 3 or 4 other bass players or drummers driving the bus. You're not hard to to replace as a player of 4 strings. Whereas, yeah, so I've never, I like play, I did like playing bass. I've not played for decades, and yeah, it's something that I did, but sometimes you forget that you ever were. I forgot that I was ever a musician. I did lots of time working for businesses. You forget that you ever did it. You're reminded of it, but it seems like a foreign land.
But when you come back to it, you get reminded of your past, don't you, as
You
well?
do. And it
And
can
you
be scary.
see, sorry,
You can be scary as well.
in what way?
Well, there's a joy in it, but then there's a kind of, it's almost like, can you ever reclaim that? And do you want to go back to that? All those things. Strange one.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big thing that you've done. And now you're through the first stage, as it were, let's say, and it's successful. It must feel really different. But before you started out on it, you must have been shit scared and thinking, can I sing? Can I do this? Can
Well,
I, you know?
I became a lecturer in the early 90s, and I'd have to, because I was good at talking about the music industry and contextualizing the various composers. I had a breadth of knowledge of, everything from Ravel and Debussy to, Stockhausen and Pierre Boulez and all these kind of things. So I got to teach a lot of classes, and because I was a one-person lecture theatre kind of class deliverer, that's where that's where education makes their money. You can stick 100 people in a lecture theatre, and it costs as much as it takes to give lessons to one drummer, because you can't fit many drummers or drum kits into a room. So I became a cheap option that give all of the students in the whole college would always get me for hours upon hours of lectures. And they weren't, I never told anybody I'd been in a band. They'd find out, they'd realize, some of them would know, some of them would work it out, some of them, but it could be hostile. It was never an easy ride, but I realized quite early on that I could handle audiences that weren't agreeing with me. And so I kind of knew that if I could sing, I'd be actually enjoy playing live. But that would be 30 years ago, and I did nothing about it. I never thought that I could really, well, I never thought I could sing, and I still don't think I can sing. I know that I can handle the lyric and the music enough to make it work. And also, you're tapping into what people bring to it themselves. They're bringing their memories. They're bringing their loved ones with them. So you kind of the audience do a lot of the work for you. But yeah, it's a strange one. I think the pandemic made you realize that. I did a video, one of these things, a video, a Facebook session. Somebody asked me, said, we were having a Sprout festival online. Would you like to play some songs? I didn't even know that I could play the guitar. So I just said yes. And voice was terrible. And the songs, I can't even, some of the songs I would forget how they'd start, but I did it, and I kind of enjoyed it, and I knew it would work if I knew more of the songs and I do know them. They're there they're lodged in my head.
I mean, what's interesting, I've been looking at the YouTube excerpts of you on tour, and there's some
Yeah.
comments from your former students
All
who
right.
were saying what a brilliant he was, such a brilliant lecturer, such a brilliant teacher. And I was going to ask you what you got from them, and I find it fascinating that what you got from them is this feeling of being able to perform to an audience.
Well, I could. It was the first time I think that I ever felt that I could communicate or that I had something to say. You don't, when you're 5 years younger than everybody, kitchenware records who were signed to, everybody's 5 years older than me. I was a young kid, so I kind of, I didn't speak a lot as a young'un. But when I started lecturing, I realized that I had things to say and could do it and could handle it. So I got a lot out of that. And some of the, and even to this day, I met when I was playing with Thomas Dolby, the guy who runs one of the venues, the City Hall in Newcastle, was one of my students 20 odd years ago. When I was in Edinburgh playing the Edinburgh, would it be the Playhouse with Tom Bailey of the Light of the Thompson twins?
Constitutes, yeah.
The rep from the promoters was one of my students. The guy who's, it's kind of across the board, and you kind of people there were bands like the Futureheads, Barry out the Futureheads. He was a fantastic kid at 16 playing guitar at school at the college, but he was in a group in a class of fantastic kids who were brilliant musicians and just keen to do stuff. So things like that just thrill the hell out of me. I get such a kick when they go off and do something, and it's just great.
So
Yeah.
when did you first sit down with Paddy and suggest this idea, and what was his response?
Um, a friend of his sent him an email saying, "Mark's touring?" Big question mark. Now Paddy said, "What? He can't sing." So that was the reaction. And when I spoke to him, he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, I've got big balls." That was it, really. And he just laughed, and we just thought, okay, just do it. Yeah.
Has he reacted to it since?
Hey, yeah, I think he's pleased I'm doing it. And the girls have been along to see his daughters, and yeah, it's been good.
I mean, it is a mad idea, a bassist becoming a guitarist, someone not known for singing, someone who's clearly was for a period uncomfortable to be the front person in front of an audience,
I used
being
to
the
walk
front
on stage.
person.
I was okay once I had the guitar on, like the bass on, but I didn't like being on stage without the bass. It was like a shield, and I felt without the bass on, I felt really uncomfortable being in front of people. But I'm kind of over that now. I think it's yeah,
So what were the challenges then to actually take these songs
it's
and make
memory.
them work?
It's the whole arranging thing. If you're a non-singer, you have to think yourself through it. I loved Burt Bacharach. I loved Bacharach and David's records. Um, Always have just adored their writing. But when you see Bacharach singing, he's not a singer, but he still gets it across. So certain songs I have to think, what would Bacharach do? And you'd barely come close to a melody. But what's it all about? LV. And you let the piano do the melody, and you voice the melody, and so if I'm playing a song like Nightingales, I have seen people saying online he murdered it. I thought I was doing a Bacharach version where I kind of talked my way through it. But never mind. I'll carry on murdering it. I really love doing it. So I'm not going to be perturbed by that.
I mean, Paddy's sort of talked about that. His pre-record company pressure days were
Yeah.
his happiest. Um,
Yeah.
in that sense, our today, you know, I know it's, you know, it's different, but today on stage, are these now your happiest? And we'll be hearing whether they are Martin's happiest times in just a second. But first, please like, subscribe, or become a member of this channel. The lowest membership form costs just €1.99. That's about $2, and it's definitely under £2. And it helps me continue to bring you these interviews on the channel. Okay, are these days the happiest days for Martin McAloon?
They're good. I'm loving it. I do love it. Are they my happiest? Probably are. I loved the early days, but um, and I do know what he means before the pressure of having to record, having to where's the next one, all of that kind of thing. And we were all we had that many songs written. We were in a very fortunate position. He'd written songs all his life, so we were able to go back. There was always, if you needed to find a song, you could go back and you could take something. B-sides. We always had something for a B-side. And some of those B-sides ended up as on the albums and the singles. Things like Golden Calf. We did that as a B-side. And then the record label hear it and go, that's a single. And you think, Christ, no, it's from years ago. It's us as 16-year-olds. It's these are songs from before the Clash had even met. Never mind become the Clash, become stars. These were songs that predate punk. Um, so we were always fortunate in having stuff to go back to, and even things like we did as an album with Tony Visconti, and it would have been around about 2000, and it was called The Gunman and Other Stories. A lot of the tracks on there would been written for Crocodile Shoes for Jimmy Nail. But things like The Gunman, they hark back to songs that we played probably about 1975 and 76 of in the garage. That there's elements of the title track which um Cher had done a version of. I remember playing a very similar thing 50 years before that. So the things were always there to come back around.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the song, it's like Bonnie, isn't it? That's also a song
Yeah,
that was recorded a long time before, and I've seen,
we
um,
played it in bars, and by the time we got the chance, we got the budget to do an album, which would be Swoon. Swoon could have had 3 or 4 of the tracks off Steve McQueen on it, but we were sick of playing them live, and we wanted to play our new stuff. So we dropped Bonnie, we dropped Farron Young, we dropped Johnny Johnny. We thought, nah, who'd want to hear those now? Let's do the new stuff that's interesting. But nobody knows the chronology of them, so it all becomes new and interesting to the audience.
why? It seems like a facile question, but I really, because I've never been a musician and I've never had a record contract in that way, then why do you have to listen, particularly in that period, to the record companies? Why did they have so much power?
Well, from my own personal point of view, is that nobody was listening to me. So why would they? I'm not the key member of the band. I'm 5 years. It's an age thing. It's 5 years younger than people. You are subservient to the people. Our manager our manager. We had 3 managers. They all worked together. They had experience of managing the biggest HMV shop outside of London, which was in Newcastle, which was Keith Armstrong. Paul Ludford, he was an accountant, and he went on to set up a massive concern around legalizing raves, and then going on to do health and safety for big festivals and lots of stuff. They had years of experience, 5 years of adult experience. They had partners and wives and divorces and things like that, where you kind of whereas I was just a 17-year-old, so I kind of watched. I'd say things. When it comes to the record company, why do you listen to them? They're the people who go into the record shops and sell them. They're the people who go into the radio and sell them. And you've got, if they're going to go in and they know from day one that it's not going to sell, and in a week's time they're going to come back and they're going to feed back to you that, well, they didn't like it, it's not catchy enough, it's not this, it's not that, or HMV don't want to give the wall space to your record because they've got Bruce Springsteen coming out next year and Michael Jackson this week, and you kind of, you know what they have to do it. They're at the front line, and you don't argue with that. You don't dismiss their knowledge of the actual physical marketplace where you're going to go. If somebody says that's a single, we can get that onto Radio 1. We can get it onto the A list rather than the B list. And that's the big difference. A list was something like 23 plays per day, or whatever it was, 23 plays per week across major primetime listening. And that's what sells records. So when the record labels say we can get this onto there, you don't argue. You kind of go, you do it. We've made the records, we've made the content. You choose how it goes. And we've always been like that, both me and Paddy. We just thought, you've got to sell it. You do what you feel it's best for it.
What else have you discovered about yourself by being on tour and being alone on a stage?
That I was always a roadie. I've always been a roadie. When we did Swoon and we'd come off tour, what would you do? Well, I'd go out with Hurrah or Martin Stevenson and the Dainties or the Cane Gang and do things for them. So I'd drive for them, or I'd tour manage Martin Stevenson, or just go and get drunk with the Cane Gang in Luxembourg and pretend to play the keyboards on TV shows. It was kind of you enjoy the life, so you just go try and have as much of that as you can. And I'm still to this day. Just around about the time of the pandemic, I was doing lots of painting. So I've had a painting studio, and I had exhibitions, and I've showed in various galleries around the country and stuff like that. But the studios that were living in was this 5, 6, 7 story tower block that was being demolished, and they were building the new HMRC building in Newcastle is now in that place. But when it came to emptying all the studios, you've got 7 floors of artist studios and gear. I spent 2 months driving the van between venues, taking stuff away. I kind of enjoy the open road. It's kind of fun. So yes, so being on the road, it's like I always knew I could do it, and I used to do it as a kid with the band. Would go on tour. I drove the van. We had a roadie, John Sunter, but I did most of it.
But okay, but did you, this I want to come back to this sentence again, because it has the feeling of like that, I was only the bass player, and you're now saying I was only the roadie. Did you feel
it's more solid? You can go and be a roadie elsewhere. There's more of a market in Newcastle for roadies and bass players.
Yeah, but it has that feeling of, I know people who have famous parents, and or I've known people that have famous parents, and I've known from their perspective what it's like to live in the shadow of someone else. And I just wondered whether because Paddy was the writer and the center and the focus of the band, whether you felt overlooked.
I've always been a wingman. I kind of go under the radar. And this is the first time in my life I've kind of come out of that. But I think I've prepared myself. I've had 60 years to prepare as a wingman. And so now it's not that big a deal. It's kind of, it was when I first started doing it, I thought I thought there's a saying in tech businesses, which is fail fast, and then iterate into something else, do something else, change it, alter it, whatever it is. But it's far easier to just go out. You learn when you only ever learn when you start doing something. You don't learn from rehearsals. I could have rehearsed for another 6 years and would still face the same fears going on stage. So just go on stage, fail or succeed or learn in the way and alter as you go.
I mean, that's a really brave thing, because when you're older, it's much harder to fail when you're older, isn't it?
Yeah, I think well, I think if I do fail, it'll just go straight under the thing, and I'll have forgotten by tomorrow, and so will the audience.
Oh dear. Well, it's not certainly not going under the radar at the moment, so that's brilliant. I mean, the you chose music from the whole of, well, say the last 40 years, but we
Yeah.
know what it went up to really. But you chose music the whole of the era of
Mhm.
Prefab Sprout. What was the idea behind it? I mean, I looked at a set list, and I think it was the Birmingham set list, and you've got like Bonnie, When Love Breaks Down, Appetite, Goodbye Lucille, they're from Steve McQueen. You've got Cars and Girls, The King of Rock and Roll, from Langley Park to Memphis. You've got Life of Surprises from Protest Songs, and you've got Looking for Atlantis and Carnival from Jordan, The Comeback, and Cowboy Dreams, which you sort of mentioned, The Gunman and Other Stories. Um, and I just wondered, what was the thinking before in terms of presenting this whole sort of life of Prefab Sprout,
I think
and also the particular songs?
well, those songs were all. I think that sounds like a set from Thomas Dolby's support thing. So that was you hit
Right.
them with singles. These are the singles that people will know. They might not realize it's you. They might not realize. They might think I'm Jimmy Nail. Them, but they'll know enough of those songs to break through and convince an audience that was primarily Thomas's. Although I did have a lot of people there that knew our stuff. And similarly with Tom Bailey, went out with him, do the hits, get them to come to your own show where you'll do 2 hours of more esoteric stuff that goes through there. I wonder, certain songs I love playing. There's a certain musicality to them, and things off Swoon where it was quite complicated because the rough edges hadn't been knocked off us in the production process. These are rough edges that we knock off ourselves because you suddenly realize through experience we need a quicker, more honed route to get to this point than when we were just doing Swoon, where we were kind of anything goes, we'll throw everything into the mixing desk and hope it works. And luckily it does because you get used to it. But the songs from just the other day, just last week, I shouldn't be learning more songs. I should just be concentrating on the 60 that I already know and going through them constantly because it's like painting the bridge across them, in Edinburgh. It's the Forth Road Bridge. It's like it's endless. But there was a song the other day which was um Here on the Erie from the record Swoon, which is an obscure song. It's a disco waltz. It's our attempt at disco waltz. Can you imagine that? It never really caught on as a genre, did it? Disco waltz. Go on, Steve. Name me another disco waltz song, and I'll give you a fiver. It's niche, but I kind of heard. I thought about that the other day. I woke up and I thought, how would you do it now? And I've figured it out. I don't know whether it'll work. I don't know whether I've had enough time to practice it. And all of these things, the lyrics take forever to learn, and the order of the lyrics, and then the melody of the lyrics, and the notes that I come close to, and where do you fit them when you're playing something else at a different time on you with your hands? You've got to seriously sit down and figure out the arrangements for these things. But yeah, I can, Here on the Erie is a slow waltz, as in a Jacques Brel style. I could do that.
I mean, you mentioned Here on the Erie, and like the idea of a disco waltz, and this being a sort of, in a sense, Prefab Sprout were always a little bit out of step with the time, which
Damn
was
right.
part of their
Damn right.
uniqueness. And
Yes,
and so for me, when you sort of talk about that, I think this all sort of fits together
yeah,
still in the context of Prefab Sprout,
it does.
because you know there's all these 80s bands that are reforming or coming, they're now touring again and playing again. They're coming together and playing again, but they're following what they did back then. And in a sense,
No,
you're
it,
doing the
yeah.
you're doing the same thing, but in this out of step
I'm,
version.
I'm, I'm, I'm saying. You see, this is the thing that it's a very it's this is all about marketing as well. It's kind of the 40th anniversary of all of these records coming out is an easier sell than just going out. So you've got this nostalgic um kudos that you can kind of tap into. But I kind of see this as new nostalgia. I want people to go away and think, oh, remember when he did that version of it, rather than the record. I have I don't listen to the records, so I don't have any intention of recreating the records. Give me the budget to make those records, and that's when we can start recreating the records. There's a lot of pressure on me to say I'm going out and doing Steve McQueen, but what do you want me to do? Jump that motorbike over the barricade as well? It's like pointless. It's not going to happen. Steve McQueen failed to get over the barricade. I'm not going to fucking do it, am I?
I mean, what the fact that you've been out on tour and you're going out further on tour and you've been playing all these songs, and the band have always had an amazing loyal fans as well. So they're
Yeah.
coming and they're hearing, slightly different versions
Yep.
of what they know. If you take that sort of a step further, Paddy wrote so many songs that haven't
Yep.
been released.
Yep.
There's this whole catalogue to dive into at one point, isn't there?
Yes. I know two or three of them that I could play. Um, it's just really treading the line between I think it's a fine line between doing something that's unknown and doing something that is known. If I do something that's unknown, which I could do, it would I think it might obliterate the opportunities to record those songs properly at some point for Paddy. So the songs that I kind of avoid doing, although I would love to do them, for those purposes, things that haven't been released. Other things I've found online, which are demos that have been leaked from places, and I think, well, that's a fairer game to do a version of a demo that's already been leaked. That's somewhere that I feel less responsible for leaking. If I was to go out and leak those songs in live situations, I don't know how I'd feel a bit not great about that. I think I'd love to do it. There's a couple of songs that I would love to play live that nobody's ever heard, but at the same time, there's a moral line where you think, hold on, this might scupper it for somebody, for the proper version of it.
When we get older, we don't necessarily relate to the younger version of ourselves. If I think 30 years ago and when I was at MTV and interviewing people, and it's weird, when I did this podcast, I started looking back and seeing that time differently. And in between, it was like that version had nothing to do with me. But now there are things that I look back and think, okay, I was younger, but I was, there were certain things that were really good about it, and certain things
Yeah.
that I think, okay, that's a younger person that did that.
Yeah.
How do you, how has this made you sort of view the younger version of yourself?
Um, it's been good. It's been useful. Um, I think a lot of people would think that, the usual story is you go into the music industry, you get ripped off, you lose all your money, and you never see any rights. And in the main, that's correct. But I don't have regrets about that. I don't see it and I kind of see myself, and I kind of knew that even back then, I knew that the money was going to be tied up, and you were living a lifestyle, not necessarily a it wasn't really a career. It was a kind of a lifestyle that you inhabited. Um, but the alternative is to be completely overlooked and to not get the opportunity to do those records, and and that's the price you pay for making something that's going to last an eternity for other people. I think I don't mind it so much. And also I was always into the business side of it. I kind of could see things happening at the same time. So the business, the logistics, the thinking behind how you play the record company, if you know that their next move is going to be to say, we need a follow-up to Steve McQueen, what should we do before they ask? And that was protest songs. It was kind of, we were meant to be promoting our new album, which was about to come out. And we thought, let's go into the studio and cut, cut the cut that conversation down to nothing by saying, here's the follow-up, which is nothing like Steve McQueen, which is a rougher record that was done at home, which with no budget, which nobody knows about. It was kind of you, and of course, then you realize, no, they work on an 18 months release schedule. They aren't going to do anything until Steve McQueen's done 18 months worth of work, and you've toured it and you've promoted it on every landmass on the universe and Mars. It's kind of you kind of go, okay, you learn from this, but you're still glad you do it.
I mean, you mentioned earlier about Thomas Dolby, and of course he was a big part of the success at the beginning of Prefab Sprout, and that you played support possibly in Birmingham. I'm not sure. You think it must have been.
It was, yeah.
How did he react to the sort of stripped down version of the songs?
How do you react?
Because on you on that set list is Bonnie, Appetite, When Love Breaks Down, Goodbye Lucille, all songs that
Yes,
he
yes.
produced.
Okay. I'll just tell you straight. The opening night was in Glasgow at St. Luke's. Thomas had been doing his sound check, and his sound check went on for quite a while. There was lots of stuff to be synced up, the videos and stuff like that. So it went on for quite a few hours. And then I went on stage with like half an hour before the doors opened. They'd held the doors back. And I went on, I had 12 minutes in which to do the sound check. And I forgot everything. I forgot Appetite, how to start Appetite. I've tried to play When Love Breaks Down, forgot it. Started to play Bonnie, forgot the solo. I couldn't figure it out. I was in the wrong keys for everything. And he was sat there the whole time in the middle of the room, eating a pizza and on his phone. And I was looking, thinking, 40 years of classic recordings have just evaporated. Our legacy has gone up in fucking smoke in 12 minutes. And he didn't look up from his phone. And I just thought, Christ, I was never so nervous in my life. And afterwards, just before I went on stage, he said, Mart, just slow down and just be considered when you go out there. I thought, yeah, that's what I mean. I was just absolutely lunatic.
Oh, that's amazing. Did it bring back about when you first met Thomas Dolby, when he came up to the small village?
Yeah.
What were your memories of that?
Well, I remember him going off with our Paddy to a room to go through songs together, and I sat and I can remember what I listened to. It was The Clayton Act by Arnold Schoenberg. I listened to that downstairs. I was in another world. That's what I did that day. So yeah, I'll have picked him up. I'll have driven him over. I'll picked him up from the station and driven him over. But yeah, I listened to Verkleiten Act.
So you didn't take in that this was sort of a pivotal moment for the band?
No, well, I remember listening to the the it was Radio One, the round table thing where he was on it, where he'd said that he liked Don't Sing. He liked that song when it was released as a single. Nobody else liked it. They all hated it. And I remember hearing it. My first thoughts was to say to Paddy, keyboards, that's what we need. We need a keyboard player because Swoon, Paddy did all the keyboards on Swoon, I think just about everything. But he wasn't a piano player or a keyboard player, and he'd learned when we found out that we had the budget to do an album. We'd been promised a budget to do the album. He started to work on the keyboards, and this is somebody who's never played the keyboards other than three-fingered versions. So he'd never use he wouldn't use his little finger or his thumb. It was everything was in these like three fingers in the middle of the thing. And he worked on all these parts for Steve McQueen and learned them and remembered them and then was able to perform them on the recording. I thought that was an incredible feat to do that with absolutely no connection to the instrument, really. Now he's great on it because he writes on it now and he plays the keyboards all the time. I don't play the keyboards. I haven't played the piano in decades. But yeah. So I can't even remember what the question was.
Well,
I've gone
it was more
reverie.
it was whether you realized that this was a pivotal moment, when
Yeah,
Thomas
I mean,
Dolby was
it
there.
was, I don't know whether I did. It's people say to you, you must have been great doing this stuff at the time. But you're never aware of it, and you make the records. It's just another day in the office, really. It's kind of you're making records. I remember people would say, "Well, you met this person and that person," and I remember making, I think, Langley Park to Memphis or Jordan. No, it would be Langley Park to Memphis. And I'd be in the kitchen, and Donna Summer was next door, and she'd come into the kitchen, and she'd be getting Perrier water out of the fridge, and Jenny Agutter would be there and with us, and we'd be sat there, and it was like, hiya, how you doing? You all right? Ah, good. Lovely day. That kind of, it was, you're not thinking about these things. Or playing pool with Peter Frampton because he's next door to doing Steve McQueen. You're not discussing records. You're trying to hit the red into the pot over there. That's what you do. Just kids, just daft lads and lasses.
Yeah, no, I mean it's brilliant when it's that normal, isn't it? I think that's the normality of the whole thing.
Yeah,
Um, I mean,
I'd see
sorry.
Harold Faltermeyer every day, and Harold
Oh wow.
Faltermeyer did the soundtrack to some Eddie Murphy movie. But we'd have this conversation. We tried desperately to have a conversation where we were into each other's music, and it never worked. Day after day, I'd say, "Did you play on this one by Donna?" And he'd go, "No, I played on this one." I go, "Oh, right."
You've talked about, like learning from your students. You've talked about what you know, got from Paddy, and things that you've learned throughout your life. And you said that you were only the bass player, and clearly you've been and are much more than that. What do you feel that Paddy has learned from you?
You'd have to ask Paddy that because I really don't know. Um,
Come on,
don't
dig.
know, but he'd probably see a million ways of not to do something. I'm relentless. He's relentless in his own way. He will go about what he does, which is writing songs relentlessly, and I will go about all those other things to try and make us popular, try and get the songs out there. He's great at writing songs. I was always good at getting them out because that's where they need to be. I think that hasn't changed.
I think that's brilliant, Martin McAloon. I find it absolutely fascinating, a brilliant story, something that is really takes a lot of commitment and power and guts to do what you've done and do it successfully and bring new life into these songs, which is just wonderful. So Martin McAloon, thanks for your contribution to the creative universe, because it's really lovely to meet someone who's been part of songs that, when I was on MTV, Prefab Sprout were on, rotation all the time. And it was just lovely to remember that and be part of that and have that contribution to my life from you. So thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.